It's been over 3 months since the iPhone 16's launched. I've been using them since then, and I think now is the right time to give my full review. This video will focus on the Pro iPhones. I initially wrote this review back in October and heavily criticised Apple for hyping up their exciting new Apple Intelligence and having none of the new features available at launch. With the recent iOS 18.2 software update, we finally started to see some of those, but have they been worth the wait? The 16s have clearly had a lackluster start, but there's still plenty to like about the new phones. People are going to have questions about how they differ from last year's models, whether they should upgrade to one of these new phones or save some money by getting a 15 instead, and also what's different between the 16 Pro and the bigger Pro Max. That's changed again this year. I'm going to explore all of that in this video, and as always we'll take an in-depth look at every aspect from the build to the displays, performance, the cameras and more. Let's get into it. We'll start with the design, where the phones are slightly bigger this year. We get an extra 0.2 of an inch in screen size, resulting in the biggest iPhone displays ever. In turn, they are slightly wider and taller by a few millimeters, they add on a few grams in weight as well, but there's no change in thickness. Unless you measure the camera bump, which does stick out slightly further once again. What a spot of luck for phone case companies, eh? Now, is this size change something you really notice in your hand? If you're looking for it, yes, especially with the smaller Pros, but generally speaking, no. These essentially feel the same in your hand, so I wouldn't pick based on that, and they look almost identical to last year's as well. I can understand people being a bit bored with a design that's essentially been the same 5 years in a row. I think that's contributing to this sort of flat mood this year. I'm personally not thrilled about this year's colours either. They're much more varied and interesting with the non-Pro iPhones. The new Desert Titanium sort of brings back gold to the lineup in place of last year's blue. The Pros still use a titanium frame, have the same IP68 rating, but the ceramic shield glass is now tougher than the 15s. Apple claims it's twice as tough as any other smartphone glass. It's a bold claim, but Apple does have a good track record with durability, and any kind of improvement is obviously a good thing. There are now noticeably thinner bezels thanks to a new display tech, so that makes the phones more visually appealing. This gives you more screen space with only a small increase in the overall phone size. iPhones once trailed massively behind the competition for bezel thickness, but they're pleasingly thin now. Otherwise, the displays are pretty much identical for specs. The new resolutions accommodate the larger screen sizes, so we have the same pixel density, the same peak brightness and refresh rate. The only change is the new lower minimum brightness of just 1 nit. That's good for bedtime use and for saving battery life. So slightly bigger screens with more satisfying thin bezels might not be a huge deal to you, but I wonder if people might be tempted into getting the Pro now instead of the Pro Max. 6.3 inches is a big phone size, and it's a lot more comfortable to hold and use than the bulky Pro Max. It's certainly enough to make me prefer the Pro overall, plus it's a lot cheaper. The counter-argument, of course, is that if you didn't care about comfort or it fitting inside your pocket, you just wanted as big a screen as possible, the Max now offers a crazy 6.9 inches. It's a cinematic joy. Either way, I think these new bigger displays will change the Pro versus Pro Max decision for a lot of people this year. For those wondering about the phone's speakers, I can confirm there is no change this year. The Pro Max is of course louder than the smaller Pro, but the new models are not noticeably different from last year's.
What does perfect even mean? Is there even such a thing? Can we switch up all the rules and imagine a utopia?
There's really only one key design change I'd say, and that's the new camera control button. This is a force sensor with haptic feedback, so it gives the feeling of a clicky physical button when pressed, but you can also half press and swipe across it for extended functionality. Apple markets this mainly as a shutter button, and they've built in some software tricks to utilize it. Swiping to zoom, for example, is instantly intuitive, sometimes actually quite useful. It feels futuristic to be half pressing and swiping to navigate through your different camera modes and settings, and in typical Apple fashion, scrolling is smooth and the haptic feedback is satisfying. You can customize the sensitivity and the default app the button opens as well. The big downside though is that it creates about as many problems as it solves. In fact, I'm not sure what problem exactly it does solve. Apple says it gives faster access to photo and video controls, and maybe for the super dexterous and practiced among you that will prove true, but it's generally a lot easier to just use the on-screen controls, to not get that camera wobble pressing the button by instead tapping the screen. And then you've got the positioning problem. I have to reach across slightly more than I'd like to using this in landscape. but for portrait use it's then just too low down to be comfortable. One-handed use would have been a genuinely great use case for this button, but in reality, it's not all that practical. The good news is that the button is open to third parties, so there's the option for other developers to make better use of it. Apple weren't the first to introduce a dedicated shutter button to a smartphone, and as is often the case, I'm sure others will now follow suit. But right now it feels very much like a first attempt feature. It's one that I'm actually sad to have realised I'm just not going to be using day to day. On the surface, it's one of the biggest changes to the iPhone we've seen in a while, and I'm sure it will tempt lots of people into an upgrade. But my honest feedback on it has to be that it's really not worth it right now. So let's talk about software now, and specifically Apple Intelligence. We've had to wait more than 3 months on from launch for most of these features to even start rolling out, but thankfully iOS 18.2 brings a lot of the key features from Apple's hyped up keynote. The first important point to make is which iPhones will actually get this. So it's the entire iPhone 16 range and also last year's 15 Pros, but not the baseline 15s. So make sure you consider if you want any Apple Intelligence features before making any purchase or upgrade decisions. Only these models and newer iPhones can get them. So first up is the redesigned Siri. Not just visually, it no longer holds your screen hostage whilst listening to you, which is excellent, but it's now able to make corrections when you misspeak. And you can now tap to type to Siri for a more discreet input. More significant though is the integration with ChatGPT, which can give you smarter, more useful responses, and also process requests that Siri simply can't do. This was a surprising move from Apple, who famously want to do things themselves and the Apple way, but even they've had to concede just how far ahead ChatGPT's AI is, and since they couldn't beat them, they've decided to join them. Apple is working on an entirely revamped and smarter Siri, and features like personal context and Siri being able to take action for you across multiple apps that they showed in the keynote, those sadly won't be available for some time yet. It's a shame because those really encapsulate that exciting AI-powered smartphone future that will really change how we use our phones. The latest update brings AI writing tools to more users, like ChatGPT's Compose Text, the new proofreading feature, and the option to rewrite text in different styles. Now, rewrite is a feature I personally dislike. I don't care for Google or Samsung's versions of these either. Spelling and grammar check, sure, but rewriting in a different style I think risks removing the personality and character from the writer. At the same time, I do like summaries and organisation of text with just a tap. That could really be time-saving. Writing out an email and then having Apple Intelligence generate a bullet-pointed TLDR, that's great. You can also now generate your own AI emojis and images based on various prompts. Some may find this cool, but I really don't need my own emojis personally, and with the image generator, the reaction this invokes in me is less wow cool and more burn it with fire. I think it's the cartoon-like appearance. I just don't see the point in actually sending these to other people as Apple advertises. For obvious reasons it wouldn't be deemed impressive, and to me it's just rather joyless and soulless. I can however see features like the image wand transforming your sketches and text into illustrations for your notes and projects actually being useful. Now, there are restrictions here. You can't use brand names nor create realistic images. We all know exactly why and what creeps would do if they could AI generate realistic images of people, so you're stuck with these illustrations and cartoons only, which I guess is sensible for now, but obviously quite limited. I think a more common, real-world use case of Apple Intelligence is visual intelligence. A press and hold on the shutter button brings this up, and you can reveal information about objects on screen and ask ChatGPT for further information about them. We've seen similar ideas with things like Google Lens before, and this can be pretty useful. Whilst iOS 18.2 brings a lot of the features we've been waiting for and gives us a glimpse of an AI-powered future, I stand by my initial view that Apple should have taken the time to get these features ready for the iPhone 16 launch. The incessant need to meet this arbitrary September release date for a new smartphone every year, whether they're ready or not, is just ridiculous. And obviously Apple isn't the only culprit here. It puts company profits ahead of the user experience, and I feel bad for those who may have been misled buying a new phone for promised features that actually still aren't even available, and who knows when exactly they will be. The best and most exciting Apple Intelligence features are yet to come, and what we've seen so far you could argue is Apple simply playing catch-up to the competition. That being said, they do represent some significant upgrades from older iPhones. There are some genuinely useful features here, and they may still justifiably tempt you into an upgrade. So have they been worth the wait? I'm not 100% convinced, but let me know what you think. Moving on to performance, we've got more powerful A18 Pro chips, but internal design improvements to the structure also give better thermal performance. Apple says up to 20% better sustained performance than the 15 Pro. Also note the upgrade to Wi-Fi 7 here, so some future-proofing, though we sadly stick with Bluetooth 5.3 and don't get the latest version. Just as before, the Pro Max starts with a larger base storage of 256GB, the 128 model is only for the smaller Pro. Here's how the numbers compare against last year's phones. We're seeing just over 20% gains in the CPU scores with Geekbench 6. That's very healthy and exceeds Apple's 15% claim. And then we have just over 15% on the Metal GPU test. It's more useful to look at the 3D Mark scores though to see what this actually translates to for performance, and we're seeing around 9 extra frames per second in the ray tracing test. Interestingly, the stability scores were generally lower on the 16 Pros, but you can see the low and high scores still far outperform last year's models. So this does speak to the improved sustained performance Apple claims, and of course does confirm a really nice boost in the performance with demanding graphic tasks like gaming this year. Beyond this though, the general speed boost with the CPU will certainly come in handy as Apple releases more demanding AI processing features going forwards. The 15 Pros might be able to run Apple Intelligence, but the new models will do this faster, and you should expect the performance gap to widen over time as the phones naturally slow down. It's likely you won't initially notice the improved speed with general day-to-day tasks, but if you plan on keeping your phone for a few years, you'll likely benefit from spending extra on a 16 Pro for that future-proofing. The other performance aspect to consider is battery life. This was already excellent on the 15 Pros, and we now have larger batteries in the 16 Pros. I would say though that you shouldn't expect any dramatic gains in battery life. Yes, the 16 Pros are slightly better overall, and looking at the battery difference after an intensive performance test, these are both brand new phones, you can see the improvement in efficiency. Apple claims the new chips use 20% less power. But my real-world testing of these phones showed the 15 Pros caught up when locked in my pocket. They drained less in standby mode. So I was seeing slightly better screen-on times this year, and the more you use your phone, the more I think you'll find the battery to be better. But I was actually ending the day with roughly the same battery life as last year's models with my normal use. As usual, it's the Pro versus Pro Max argument that's more important when it comes to battery life. The Pro Max will give you noticeably longer battery life than the smaller Pro. That's its single biggest advantage, especially for power users who use their phone extensively throughout the day. But I personally find that the Pro has plenty enough juice to comfortably get you through the day. So now, with an increased screen size and how much more comfortable it is to hold and use, I think a lot more people will find the Pro fits their needs and won't need to spend extra on a Pro Max as they might have done in previous years. A quick note on charging speeds, this has also proved to be essentially the same as last year, and Apple remains behind the competition in this area. You can now get faster MagSafe charging on the 16s, though Apple aren't exactly clear about the specific requirements for this. And again, I didn't notice any obvious difference with my own testing. Speaking of charging, a quick shout out to channel sponsor Ugreen. I've shown you a bunch of their chargers before, and this one is portable. This is the Nexode power bank, a sleek and compact charger with a 20,000 mAh capacity and a super fast 130 watt power output. Naturally, this will easily fast charge an iPhone, even a 16-inch MacBook Pro, but the main reason I like it is this smart digital display. Here you can track the charging power from each of the two USB-C and USB-A ports. So if you want to visually confirm how fast your iPhone is charging, or even multiple devices at once, you can. And you get the same info when charging up the power bank itself, including the estimated time remaining. You can even see a real-time power curve with the voltage and current. It's pretty in-depth. The power bank comes with Ugreen's 13-layer safety protection, including intelligent thermal monitoring, and it supports a wide range of fast charging protocols to cover pretty much all of your devices. It's airline approved and therefore an excellent travel companion, and if you're interested in picking one of these up, then I'll leave the links to this in the video description. I believe it will actually still be discounted if you're watching this video early. Alright, let's move on to the cameras, where we have Apple's new Fusion camera for the main lens. There's also a new 48 megapixel ultra-wide lens, and both 16 Pros now have the same 5x tele lens. The 3x tele from the 15 Pro is now gone. Starting with the key upgrades, you firstly have many more options for photographic styles. You can fine-tune the colours, tone and intensity with far greater precision. Plus you can edit these after taking the photo now. The A18 Pro chip also unlocks Dolby Vision in 4K at 120 frames per second. Or in other words, slow-mo video is now finally available in 4K resolution. You can even record ProRes at 120 FPS, so the iPhone pulls further ahead as the video king for professionals. For me, the biggest upgrade by far is the new studio quality 4-mic array and audio mix. So I've recorded these front-facing videos to give you a side-by-side comparison, and can probably see there are not really any major differences in terms of the video quality. But on the 16 Pro's, audio mix lets you completely change how voices sound. So you've got inline, which captures only the voices in front of the camera. There's also cinematic, which captures all of the voices around you and brings them to the front. And then you've got studio, which can massively reduce the background and wind noise. And this one was extremely impressive. So if there was any camera upgrade that's worth paying extra for this year, it's this. Audio mix probably is the only major camera upgrade though. Looking at these main lens shots, you'll see very little to separate the 15 and 16 Pros. Certainly at a glance, it's hard to spot any significant differences, though there was a general theme of a slightly warmer colour temperature this year, and photos were often brighter as well. That's not always the case. I did see the opposite of this sometimes. It depends on the situation, but that does seem to be the general trend with the new image processing. So I was seeing this across each of the three lenses, but sadly not the mesmerising new levels of detail that Apple claimed with the new ultra-wide lens. Even cropping in closely, the two phones are pretty much on par with each other. There were occasions where macro shots were improved thanks to this greater resolution, so you'll perhaps see more of an improvement here than with ultra-wide shots. But it can be hard to compare directly side by side, because the focus plane is so shallow with super close-up macros that the two photos will often have different areas in focus. It can take multiple attempts to get a like-for-like comparison, and whilst the best attempts did generally turn out on the 16 Pros, just don't expect any dramatic improvements for this reason. It's the same with the telelens. On the Pro Max, it's the same hardware as last year, so you won't generally see much of an improvement aside from the new processing. Again, there were occasions where the 16s came out on top. This shot here, for instance, is brighter and crisper in detail. But if you're coming from the smaller Pro, then you're switching the 3x telelens for the 5x of the Pro Max. This actually has some disadvantages at the lower zoom levels because the new Pro has to crop in on its main lens at 3x zoom. So as expected, the 15 Pro actually outperforms the newer 16s because it's using its telelens at this point rather than having to crop in. So you'd expect the advantage to switch back to the 16 Pro when you get to 5x zoom and it engages the telelens, but as I showed last year, that wasn't necessarily the case. The text is clearer on this generator with the 16 Pro, as expected, but it's actually worse in other areas of that same photo. So it could be a focus issue, but you'd expect it to perform better all round. As you move to 10x and further zoom levels, the 16 Pro does pull ahead more consistently. So the switch to the 5x lens is obviously better for those into longer zoom range photography, but it does have its drawbacks as well. In low light, shots from the 16 Pros are generally brighter, but have the same exposure time. That new faster sensor captures more light. Now, I personally don't really like it when phones overexpose nighttime shots. I like that realism of the darkness and shadows in the sky. But one clear improvement it does bring is with colour. You can see that heavy saturation on the left with the 15 Pro Max, and the colours are much more natural and realistic with the 16 Pro Max. So the 16 Pros generally captured images that were closer to what I'd see in real life, especially in super low light situations. So this is really where you'll see the biggest camera improvements in terms of photos. Just to show off some rear video samples as well, the difference is much the same as it is with photos, so no substantial quality difference at all. The colours were generally slightly warmer with the 16 Pros, but in terms of sharpness, detail and even stability, you shouldn't expect much of a change. And finally, with selfies, we do have the same hardware, so it's just processing differences we're looking for. And as you might have guessed, there's once again barely any change. I think the 16 Pro selfies are sometimes a touch brighter and warmer in colour, but you'd certainly be hard pressed to differentiate them in a blind test. So overall, this has turned out to be one of the smallest camera upgrades we've seen for a while. The biggest changes are with photographic styles, audio mix, and of course the new camera control button. With the smaller Pros, you have that switch from the 3 to the 5x telelens, and although I'd personally have rather stuck with that 3x lens, I definitely like that the Pro and Pro Max now have an identical camera setup again. That's much easier for consumers, and you can just pick the phone size you prefer. I wouldn't actually consider this minor camera upgrade to be a bad thing. The 15 Pros already have fantastic cameras that compete for the smartphone camera #1 spot, and it's great news for those of you who like to wait and buy last year's phones at a cheaper price. You can enjoy the fact that you're not really missing out on the latest cameras. The 16 Pros come in at the same prices as last year, starting at $999 for the Pro and $1199 for the Pro Max. There's a $200 price jump going from a Pro to a Pro Max these days. And granted, the baseline Max has more storage, but the Pro is now clearly better value for money. Now that the phones are bigger, the battery life is so good, the cameras are identical, Apple is giving us fewer reasons than ever to go for the Max. The regular Pro is cheaper and more comfortable to use with little to no compromise, but I know lots of you just love having big phones. The more interesting question is whether the 16 Pros are worth it over the 15 Pros. No one needs to make this one-year upgrade, that much should be obvious. But with no killer exclusive features this year, you'll probably want to look for a now discounted 15 Pro if you're trying to decide between the two. You might be tempted by the new bigger sizes this year. There's a healthy performance boost that I actually don't think gets enough of a mention, and the new camera control button is undeniably cool, if a bit unnecessary. The 16 Pros are incredible phones, arguably the very best on the market. I don't want this review to gloss over that. They've just been upstaged by their predecessors. We've essentially got the same 5-year-old design, the same displays, and the vast majority really won't notice any change in battery life, the fact that performance has been turned up from 10 to 11, or the minor camera bump. You could pretty much just play around with your photographic styles to achieve what the 16 Pro cameras can do. But fundamentally, the delayed and staggered release of Apple Intelligence has let this year's phones down. And considering that last year's 15 Pros will get those AI features as well, I think it's a pretty safe bet that you should save your money this year and either get one of last year's models, or wait for the rumoured major redesign with the iPhone 17s. So that's been my in-depth look at the new 16 Pros after 3 months of use. Let me know in the comments which new phone you're getting and why. If this video has been helpful at all, then please give it a like. Do also subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get notified when new uploads go live. And thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you next time.